and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about.
Alzheimer Speaks wants to welcome you to a special edition called Dementia Chats, where you will hear directly from the true experts, those living with a form of dementia. And we're going to hear insights from them about how do they identify and then how do they adapt when they know their brain processing, skills have changed. And that's a huge thing as any type of dementia, progresses there in something that we all need to be aware of so that we can help support them as well, through this disease so people can stay more engaged and still feel a quality of life. So I am Lori LeBay. I am the founder of Alzheimer Speaks, and my mom lived with dementia for 30 years, and that's what got me started in this field, because I just think it is so important to hear from people who are actually diagnosed, because you know what? They are in the trenches 24/7 and there's no escape from the disease and there's no denying what is happening. And we need to hear from them the realities, because if we don't hear, if we don't listen, if we don't pay attention, we're really never going to make any progress here. So I'm so thankful that we have, this panel once a month. So we're going to go around and have everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll go ahead and start with this topic. So Ginger, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi. I'm an 87-year-old retired speech language pathologist who around 10 years ago had to retire because of dementia symptoms. And they were severe enough that about 5 years later, I ended up in a nursing home, bedridden, aphasic, couldn't move, hallucinating, and was on hospice. And on hospice, instead of dying, I started to get better. So that's the start of my story. And I just love what Lori does here. It's so valuable. Lori, do you mind me asking you, you talk about your mom a lot and her 30-year. Did she progress very slowly? Or was it just hit her and then you had to live with it? I'm just curious.
No, it was very slow. In fact, the first 10 years she was misdiagnosed. I mean, we as a family feel real solid on that. She was told that it was menopause, and my mom kept telling the doctor it's not menopause. I talk with my girlfriends, my symptoms are different, but my mom's been gone since 2014, and she lived with it 30 years. And then they had a doctor who they loved for 40 years. And, back then, no one even used the word dementia, and barely anyone used the word Alzheimer's. And so it was kind of a foreign object. And then my dad got brain cancer, and we saw, things progressing, and we thought we have to get her in and get the formal testing. And we had been pushing for that, but the doctor kept going, no, that's not what it is. And the only thing they had tested her was the 10-question test, and she had a good day and she passed with flying colors that day. And then when she went in for the 2-day, the 2 half-day tests, that was horrible on my mom. It was horrible on the family. She came out like a wet noodle and just ready to give up on life, because by then she had progressed so far. And that was very difficult for everyone. And again, we weren't even given the number to the Alzheimer's Association. So we just did this kind of on our own. And there was no connections to other people, living with the disease. There was no connections given to us for other families dealing with the disease. And oh my gosh, we didn't get any resources other than what we found ourselves. I mean, it was really hit and miss. True?
Both of my grandmothers had very slow processes too. My great-grandmother, Leota, started out with symptoms for what I recognize as behavioral variant FTD. And then the vascular came in more strongly, but she had a 35-year journey. And again, she died in like 78. So the diagnosis names, I think she had, what is it? Hardening of the arteries.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because back then, a lot of it was still called, senile and hardening of the arteries and just aging. And, we had my mom's brain autopsy. And I met with the neurologist and I said, can you just explain this to me? It's just medical jargon. And the first things out of his mouth, and he's a renowned neurologist. He's been doing what he's been doing since the 70s. And he just kind of, I don't even know what the tone of his voice was, what came out, but it was just like, oh my gosh. I mean, he was shocked at how much her brain had atrophied. And for those of you that don't know what that means, it means shrunk. But the report, said she not only had Alzheimer's, but she had Parkinson's and she had Lewy body. And then he apologized, when he made that kind of that noise and that comment. And he's like, I've never done that. And he's like, but Lori, I've never seen a brain this atrophied. And he said, but you have always said she's been living with this for 30 years. And he said, this is exactly what we should expect. And we shouldn't be questioning, families that are saying they're seeing issues or patients that are saying that they're seeing and feeling issues. And
I've heard it said that Robin Williams had the worst example of Lewy body that they had ever heard. And when you think of, his brilliance and his energy and all that, he held on for so long because he could, until it just defeated him. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to make one more comment on this, and then we'll get back to our programming because I think it's important. But I think my mom lived as long as she did, and true, maybe your grandma too, because they felt part of the community. I think that purpose makes all the difference in the world. And, that's why I push so hard to connect people to services, products, and tools, and advocacy, and social prescribing, to get people connected to things that actually will make a difference every day in their life, allowing them to feel part of instead of not belonging. So,
Laura, I still hear neurologists, these are medical professionals, still take people, just go home, take care of them till they die, and without all the resources and the things that your organization has come up with, there is so much. Maybe there's not a cure yet, but there is a lot that can be improved upon. Social support, diet, a lot.
Yeah. And there's, again, I want to kind of close this portion out so that we make sure that we get to the topic of the day. But again, as we come together and as we make an environment that's comfortable for people to speak, that's where the collaboration happens. And people start talking and sharing instead of being fear-based and not feeling like it's okay to share, or what's going to happen if I tell somebody I have dementia, all of those types of things. Anyways, we had you, Ginger, introduce yourself. True, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
My full legal name is Truthful Loving Kindness, and my current diagnosis is mild cognitive impairment with symptoms of Lewy body, and I have cerebrovascular disease. I I'm active with Dementia Mentors, and I don't blog anymore, but my blog is available.
Okay, great. And Karen, you want to introduce yourself?
Well, sure. I'm Karen Creekmore, and I don't have my little notes. So I was diagnosed back in 2014. It's changed 3 times, initially with Alzheimer's, then unspecified symptoms of dementia when they didn't find plaques or tangles. And the latest is mild neurodegenerative disorder with probable dementia, or possible, whatever. So it's all the same thing. It's brain change. And what was your next question?
No, I just wanted you to introduce yourself. That's
Yeah.
okay.
So I'm part. I'm living well with my brain change. Part of Dementia Mentors and DAA and other groups and TIPA and you, giving back and receiving all at the same time. This balance that we have.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Cricky, you had brought up this topic about, identifying and adapting when you realize your brain processing has changed. And I guess my first question is, how do you recognize it, or is it different depending on how it manifests?
That is an open, loaded question for me because I'm just now coming out of getting back into my routine or new normal, if you will. I think for myself, when I first started, because of all of these groups, I would hear other people's experiences as they were going through, either before or after wherever I was in the brain change. And so I would pick up on these things and those would help me. But it's the self-awareness that has helped me, only because I know I have brain change, whatever you want to call it. I know I'm going through this, and I don't need a label, but because of this, when something happens, like when I had it was a lithium lisinopril, it was a toxicity, which was life-threatening, in hospital for 5 days years ago. When I came out of that, I live alone. I remember I used to program. I couldn't use my cell phone. I couldn't figure out what little square had Samsung Notes, which had all of my routine on it. So my brain was saying, well, what am I supposed to do now? And then all of a sudden this flash came across my face, and it says, this is what nursing home looks like. That's that point. And I don't remember anything other than just, I couldn't play the piano. I couldn't, and I wasn't freaked out either. I wasn't depressed. It was weird. Anyway, long story short is, I'm sure it was just a few days, because I was still in touch with some people, but I do live alone. And all of a sudden I figured out which button it was. And then it was all these different screens. I couldn't get back to it. But then I just kept breathing. It's okay. I'm okay. We're okay. My higher power, whatever. And it just and I'm back playing the piano, and not that way, but it was just a few days of lost it. That's the end, but not really, because that's just a new beginning of where I'm going on my path. Mm-hmm. I know I'm not making sense. So anyway, that self-awareness, and this last time I was not self-aware of me losing when I was helping my mom. I wasn't aware that I was leaving out all of my support groups. I wasn't aware that I wasn't taking care of me. And I'm so grateful that I was there with my mom. It was just an incredible experience, and I would never change it for anything. But that was the one part that I wasn't aware of, the going to less meetings and not being a participant, not socializing, those kind of things. And so I'm building that back up. And that was the most important thing for me, is to have that self-awareness and then do something about it.
Well, that's wonderful. The point you brought up of kind of losing yourself, I mean, that applies to everyone as a caregiver, as a person with dementia. And I mean, as a caregiver, that's one of the biggest things people say is, you've got self-care is critical, but self-care is critical for the person diagnosed as well. And I think the message to the caregivers is out there loud and clear, but not always to the actual person that you're caring for, how critical that is. And it's that socialization, it's that humanization. And when you're dealing with something big, it's really easy to get lost and put all your energies somewhere else, and it feels natural and it feels like the right thing to do, and then all of a sudden it hits you and go, wow, I'm depleted. I've lost some things here. And a lot of times we don't have that self-awareness. So that's an absolutely excellent point. Plus, I think it hits home to that importance of feeling like you belong and you have a tribe supporting you as well. And
I had what we call anosognosia, which is a condition where you're not aware of your symptoms, and you don't. And as a speech pathologist, I worked with people with Lewy body. I knew what the symptoms were, and I just couldn't apply them to myself. And I said, no, that couldn't be. And so finally, it was kind of interesting. I discovered my cell phone records on my cell phone. That's when I came home from the nursing home, and I read them, and they were heart rendering. I remember one I wrote to my grandson. I said, Josh, I don't know where I am. I don't know who I am. It just so scared, and slowly, I started realizing who I was, and luckily I'm a member of Kaiser. That's my medical the people who take care of me, Kaiser, for about 40 years. I started working at Kaiser about 40 years ago as administrative secretary, and then I became a transcriptionist, put myself through graduate school, and then I went back and worked at Kaiser, and I could go back there and look at, fortunately, all my records, and I remember spending one night, more than one night. Actually, I sent for them, and this is hard to believe, I know, but I sent for my medical records. It came through my cell phone, and there were 900 pages. I kid you not, 900. A lot of that were just lab resorts, one page after the other. But whoa, that was so enlightening, being able to go back and quantify what the start of it and how it got worse and worse over time, and how I ended up actually bedridden and hallucinating and couldn't move. But can you imagine going through 900 pages?
yeah, that's a lot. So for you, Ginger, how do you recognize, or like when do you recognize that things aren't clicking? When we were offline, people talked about the brain processing. It might be that things just don't connect, or it might be that it just takes longer to be able to process things for a reaction, or a thought to form, or for speech to come out. Have you dealt with any of those types of things?
Yeah. For a while, I couldn't talk at all. I had I mumbled. I remember reading. Oh, I also found this kind of interesting too, is while I was on hospice, there was a binder, and it was my hospice binder, and I was able to read it. And unfortunately, I didn't have my phone, or I would have taken pictures of it. I did write down all the medications I was on, all 20, And I remember reading one that was kind of poignant. It was her son just arrived, and she's drooling and mumbling, and her eyes lit up, and that one kind of hit. I don't always remember when he visited, and my other son, who lives in Reno and I haven't seen for years, that's the last time I saw him. When I was right in the middle of my dementia, when I was really not. Oh, at the time, you get a kick out of this maybe, but my imagination. I don't know if other people have that or not. I'd love to hear, because this is my imagination kind of went crazy, and I was hallucinating that there were people in the nursing home that were out to kill me. And I remember I was so serious about that. I was telling my family very seriously. They're actually up. There's a second story here. You can't tell. And oh, I remember, Lurie. I remember every one of my hallucinations. They're not like dreams at all. I remember
Okay.
them. I can play them back like I'm playing a movie in my mind. I could describe them in minute detail,
Mhm.
all of them.
So for you, the brain change was more hallucinations or not being able to speak,
Yeah.
and then being able to kind of come back from that after time. Was there anything specific that you did to, for you personally, to try to get a handle on the hallucinations, or to
Oh yeah,
work?
that's an interesting point. I hadn't. Yes, I remember at at that one point as they started kind of to come alive, to come back to me. I remember that I was still hallucinating, and I would purposely, because I was lying there all by myself. It was COVID, by the way. It was 2018, 2019 when I was in the nursing home, and I was no visitors, and the staff all wore masks, and I'm so hard of hearing, and I didn't have a hearing, so I just like it was the world had passed me by, and I remember starting to get well and realizing that and thinking, I don't want to lose my hallucinations. I want to keep them, but in order to recover and to be able to talk to my son lucidly, I had to give them up. And I actually almost remember the day, because one of my favorite ones is, this sounds kind of strange, was the room kind of slowly spinning around. I really liked that feeling. I said, Ginger, no more. They're gone now. You have to give them up now. You're recovering. You're going to become yourself again. You have to give them up. And I did. I
Okay.
did. I remember them, but I don't do them. Let's put it that way anymore. They're gone
Well,
so
that's
far,
interesting
and it's
because,
been 2.5 years. So
yeah, I've
they're
never
good and
heard
gone.
Yeah, I've never heard of anyone being able to control that. So that's kind of interesting.
That was toward
Um,
the very end. Towards the
mhm.
very end, I certainly couldn't. Oh well, yeah, I did do something. I think we've talked about that, Laura. Just to throw in real quick, is I did use a technique called lucid dreaming
Mhm.
to change the how my hallucinations were. If they were like I thought for a while I was a vicious backed snake, a mean, and I changed myself into a pretty green jeweled pet snake, and so I was able to, and I can now apply that to my dreaming, to my lucid dreaming. So that's something I would love to be able to teach caregivers, or to get that known that it's possible. It takes a lot of effort. It's not overnight, and it's a lot of technique. Like, you can kind of maybe Google it or something like that. I'm not the world's expert on it, but I know I do it, and it works, and it helps.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you. True. How about you? How do you identify and adapt when you feel like your brain is changing?
I don't know. Um, I I guess one of the things is like the phone rang a couple days ago, and and um, and I I said, I said, I said, Tom, yeah, Guy, skunk. There was a skunk, and then then I could talk. There was a skunk. Guy is taking it out to the woods, and then he said, "Oh, okay, have him call back, etc." But and I said, Crumbles, that was a pretty bad one. I wish that I had it recorded, thinking that then saying, okay, what can I do about this? And I guess that is how.
So you realize after the fact that something has changed, and then do you talk to Guy about it?
Yeah, I talked to Guy about it. Well, first he called Tom and said, "Thank you for your patience," and blah 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 blah. And but making people aware of it makes it a lot easier for, like, when 4th of July, the there were a few people here, and I had to come in because I was having hallucinations, and then I took the dog back to the door, and I told the grandson, "Can you please keep an eye on the dog?" And my husband says, "Why?" And there was no words. I couldn't think of why I needed the dog outside. But then my daughter says, "Were there some problems with the dog's reaction to the fireworks?" And I said, "That's it. I need the dog." "Yeah, thank you." But having people around me aware of the problem makes it much easier. I don't feel so much on the spot because they can fill in for me.
Well, that's nice. That makes a lot of sense. I know there's a fine line of how fast we jump in for you, though, too,
Yes.
to be respectful. And so it's don't take over and take away, but let people try. That was a great example with the dog. The one thing with the phone I want to bring up, because some of our audience might not know, and I know, True, you've mentioned this to me multiple times. Before we started doing my shows and stuff on Zoom, we were doing them by phone. And you said it's just really hard for you to be able to process just audio alone without any visuals and things. And that is very common for a lot of people. It's common for people, without dementia that are hard of hearing, et cetera. But with dementia, what I've heard from so many of you multiple times is, and I think Harry Urban was the one that said it. He's like, "I didn't know I read lips. I didn't know I was taking all of this stuff in." And it's so easy for us to go, "Come on, we're leaving now," and you're not seeing any of our face, because we've got our head turned or we're marching a different direction. And that's really important for people to understand, that we can help sometimes calm a situation, or we can agitate a situation too, depending on what our reactions are, and being aware of our nonverbals as well.
Yeah.
But I love that you're open to and feel more comfortable with people assisting and knowing, because I think so often a lot of people say, I don't want anyone to know. But then there's a whole nother level of miscommunication, that comes about, and people ask, well, why did somebody act that way, or don't they like me anymore? I mean, it can get twisted sideways so easy. And if you're friends, people want to support you, but they can't if they don't know what the deal is.
Um, I talked to a friend that's a neurologist about some of the sound processing issues. And he said that one of the biggest problems is that your brain loses the ability to prioritize sound.
Mhm.
So everything goes in a basket, and then your brain is trying to pick out what sound comes from what. And it's losing that ability. So the sound of the refrigerator motor, the sound of the PC motor is all interfering with your ability to pick out those consonants and vowels. So that's a big thing, especially with those of us that have temporal lobe damage.
So I have a question for you, because this is another thing I've heard from a lot of people, that they're more sensitive to sound. Have you found that to be true? I see,
Yes.
True and Creaky shaking their head. How about you, Ginger? Are you more sensitive to sound? Now I know you have hearing loss, so maybe that won't apply for you.
Yeah, I have a tremendous hearing loss. At the same time, I wear very powerful hearing aids, and you can hear every little tiny, like a clinking at the restaurant. That going to a restaurant is impossible for me. Just not worth it. And people always seem to sit me near where that's to happen. But yeah, I am. I think it was deeply sensitive to almost everything. Talking about showers, to throw this in, that was the one thing I hated more than anything in the world, was taking a shower, is that feeling of the pressure of the water on your skin, and the slab, the shower be not padded. I remember my rear end was so bony that I lost 140 pounds. I refused to eat because I would look at food. I would look at the food there, and it looked like moving lava. And I was hungry. I wanted to eat, try, and I couldn't. So I just stopped eating. Period. And I think that that was probably one of the low points of. I was just emaciated. Fortunately, now I'm pretty normal. Thank goodness. It's been about 3 years now. I've kept the same weight, so I'm pretty happy about that. But I just noticed coming out of this operation that I had this hip replacement. I lost all my. It reminded me. It's a little scary. I've got to throw this in. I'm going through a little bit of a tiny scary period, because all of a sudden I'm tremoring again, and food refusals, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't bear the thought of starting all over, starting over again. But I'm slowly getting better. And yesterday, no pain for 24 hours. That's a change. I don't know how much my MCI added to my having trouble. I mentioned before, they kept saying, by now it's been 30 days, you're not supposed to be having pain. And excruciating pain, excruciating. But like I say, 4 hours without it. So I think I'm on the mend. But that whole experience of sensitivity to almost anything right about now is it's felt deeply and a little scary. And happily, it seems to be turning the tide.
Good.
And I'm very, very thankful for my team, and of course my wonderful family, my son, who's been absolutely incredible. Very, very thankful for the help I'm getting.
Right. Thank you. Creaky, you had your hand raised, and then True. Oh, for True? Okay.
I have right now I have 4 sets of earplugs in reach. I go anywhere, I am probably going to have some earplugs in because the sound, again, the brain processes sound differently. And I have terrible, the sharps, and like Ginger was saying, the sound in the shower, is atrocious. The sound with the tub running. It's really a problem. And then that, again, we were talking about changes, changing, thoughts, changing focus from one person to another in our Zoom, etc. Changing, the thought was there, had to do with that was the background for what I was going to say, and now what I was going to say is gone.
So was it because you had mentioned like if there's 4 squares that are showing right now, and you had said like if you and Creaky were talking and then someone else jumped in, sometimes it was hard to flip into the next conversation, that it's not always the same conversation in your mind.
Yeah, changing topics, changing people that are speaking, changes, period, are just so slow. The processing of the change is difficult, and it takes more and more time. I mean, I've been living with symptoms for 20 years now, and it just, apparently my screen is froze, but it's definitely a slope of how long it takes to change between things.
Mm-hmm. What about one of the things I want to ask you guys about is touch, because I did a program, this was years ago, about the senses and how they change, and the person I was interviewing goes, no, there's no change. And I said, well, you just do me a favor, and over the weekend just monitor that, just really be on top of the sound, the sight, the touch, the smells, taste, all of that stuff. We got back together and she's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, because they were all subtle changes. But she said, somebody can't approach me from the back anymore because it startles me and it'll scare me, and that can make me a fall risk, now. And but it was really interesting, or how tastes have changed, and all of our senses affect our perception, and then of course that affects our communication, and itself, along with the processing that can go haywire within that. So Creaky, have you noticed anything like with your other senses, like touch and things?
Okay. I'm so sorry. I knew I shouldn't have come on. I would like to, yes, that's what I'm going back to what I do nowadays. When I had help coming in, if somebody were going to change, we can't do this on Zoom, but my friend would come in. She was anyway, and if she was going to change the subject or the topic, instead of just blurting out, oh, by the way, I might be, oh, da da da, she goes, change the sub, this is changing the topic, blah blah. So that allows me to breathe, clear my brain, new subject, and then talk a little slower. I just want to, I'm just going to share this. I wrote this probably with Prue's help back in 2020, a communication letter to everyone. I was diagnosed with blah, blah, blah at 59. I'm the same person I was before my diagnosis. I comprehend everything you say. It just takes a bit longer to hear the question or comment, process it, and respond. My short-term memory and executive functions are the main issues at this time, so please, and just bulleted, make sure you have my attention. Say my name, eye contact, ask one question at a time, and give me time to respond. And I shoot for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, or, usually what I'll do if I'm thinking and people know that I have brain change, I'll do this, or like, just a second, and they'll know not to say anything, but it's all relative too. Please try not to interrupt or ask another question before I answer the first one. And then if it were a doctor's appointment, write down what we discussed step by step on what I need to do and give me a copy. That's for doctors and stuff. And then most of all, please be patient. And so I've kind of, just real quickly, I do 12-step recovery program, for 35 years. And that is my life, all different kinds. And recently I kind of backed away because of these sound issues. And so, of course, I Googled or was in a group, the earplugs. And so I bought some cheapies. And what I do now, and this is just where I am in this moment, what's working for me, instead of not going and not socializing, because I am missing out on all these people that I've known for a long time, and part of my life is earplugs, and to where I can hear, but I can focus on one. It's only, you share one person at a time. So it's not earplugs. I go late, after they've started, so people don't come up and 15 people, oh, I haven't seen you. And then I leave early, and I still get the gist of the meeting, and I enjoy it, and I sit kind of away from people, and I share if I feel like it, and so, and I don't judge me, it's just like, I'm there, I am participating, I have purpose, and I'm just gaining all kinds of good stuff with it. So that's what's helping me a lot.
The tip with the earbuds, I think, is really helpful for everyone. And, you guys have mentioned that. But I love that you said, I don't go early because I can't take the group interaction thing. It's too much. But you figured out a workaround to still be able to participate. And, that's a really beautiful thing. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And then I would go, have lunch with a couple, just 3 or 4 or 2 or 3. And that works perfect. And, so I'm able to still be there and enjoy life and just new workarounds.
I love the term you use, Creaky, all the time. It's workarounds. I love that. I'm going to really need your workaround this coming Wednesday. Is my grandson's bringing my great-granddaughter, and she's around 2. And the little thing is into everything. And he did a surprise visit, and I'm sitting there watching her practically destroying my nice little things. I am going to be cleaning house and moving stuff so it's out of sight, out of mind. But to tell the truth, I was just like, as much as I loved them, I was like, get the heck out of here. I can't take another second. So I'm going to really plan ahead for this visit. And I have all these beautiful horses, collection I have. But boy, I'm going to strip that off.
I just wanted to add that one little phrase that I use, that it takes away all the words that I think I need to come up with to find what I'm looking for when I'm not aware of what I need to do, is this little one sentence thing. And I'm sure it's a therapy thing, but the word this, whatever it is, this is a challenge, and I have the resources to manage it. So this can be brain change or, doing whatever. And the resources, that is one sentence that brings my amygdala down. It's like, I'm freaking out, but I have resources. So that calms me a little bit, but what are the resources? So then I go, what are my choices? I can either go to bed and cry and eat and sleep and all that, or I can call a sponsor, or I can call a therapist, or I can hang out with friends, but it's just all of this stuff that goes on in one little thing really helps me breathe.
Well, and that's such a good point on so many levels because stress increases symptoms. We all seem to know that. I don't know if all the doctors really know that. And even how sometimes the way they deliver stuff can add stress onto an individual and a family. And I love the breakdown here too of okay, I got that phrase and then that panic button hits of what's the resources, and then it's like, no, what are my choices? And then because we always have choices and they might not be the perfect choice that we think we need, but it's still a choice. It's another step, and it's a calming one when we feel like we're in control and have choice. So I love that. True for you. Do you react to touch different at all? I'm going to go back to that question.
I don't think that I react to touch different, but I have, I've had a lot of sound hallucinations. I've had some sight hallucinations, and recently I have had some touch hallucinations.
How about you, Ginger? Do you react different to touch at all?
Well, I can tell you that I miss it. I have a son that's a hugger and one that isn't. And I find myself with friends. I want that hugging. I love it.
Well, and they say as we age, we have less touch in our lives. And if we're living alone, that can be amplified even more, and that can be a subtle change that happens over time. But it can make a difference. What I found with this woman who I interviewed was it was more of the startle piece, like when you said with the shower, that coming down when it first hits you, it's like, what is that, or somebody approaching from the back or just touching you in a different way. True?
Yeah, actually, I do have a problem when it comes to touch in the shower.
Mhm.
I never shower anymore because it feels like I am being attacked by the water. The water pressure feels just overwhelming.
Mm.
See, my mom had an issue with that, and it was Tipa who enlightened me on what to do in the shower. Because I said, my mom's always liked the water. She was a swimmer, she never had a problem, grooming or anything. And then it was turning into this battle. And I said, she keeps saying it hurts. And I'm going, how can it hurt? I mean, it doesn't hurt me. And how she explained it to me, which made a ton of sense. She said, as we age, so this isn't just a dementia thing, this is as we age, we lose our fat pads. And I said, well, my mom's a big woman. She says, no, I'm not talking fat. She says, I'm talking fat pads under the skin that protect the nerves. And so you're feeling that pressure because you don't have the protection of that fat, to protect the nerves. And she said, so this is a really common issue for people of all ages. And I said, well, what do you recommend? And she said, if you can get a handheld rain shower head, that will make all the difference in the world. So for me, I went into the nursing home and talked to the director, and I said, I want to replace all your shower heads. and he's like, well, why? And I told him, the story, and he didn't know that either. But and then she of course made the recommendation that the water temperature can be startling too hot, too cold, and that can throw people for a loop. So she said, always have the water running first, get it to the temperature you want. But if you have it handheld, it can be on the floor of the shower so it's not beating down. And she said, and always start at the feet. She said to let their body temperature get used to it versus, and then not the whole body is getting wet all at once. Where if you start at the top, then there's all this sensation going over the body. But if you start at the feet and then kind of work your way up, and she said, some people will be cold too. She said, so, if they're sitting on a shower chair or something, maybe you need to have an extra towel or two wrapped around them so that their body is not cold until until you're washing that area. And she said, and which is an excellent point for at home or in a community, who can't handle washing a couple extra towels versus having somebody fall and get hurt or have some type of incident, or just that whole fear, and pushback of taking the shower. I mean, that can change someone's mood. I know for my mom, when she would get really frustrated or angry or not understand what was going on, she could hold on to that mood well after that situation was gone. So to be able to avoid all of that, because it's not a behavior, it's a reaction. And, it's our job to figure out these clues. And I think that that's, so critically important. Creaky?
Yeah, just on the touch, I had some abuse issues and stuff, and I've never been in an intimate relationship or anything, and so for the longest time, and I'm still this way, but not severely at all. I love hugs and hugs with people I know and that kind of a thing, but touch me from the back, and my startle response, even if it's somebody I know, but let me know, it's like that without warning, touching me is kind of a deal with me.
And this was a processing issue with my mom, and it came out, but it was the story is such a good learning lesson for all of us. My mom was in a nursing home, and they were doing like a big party outside. And she was, my mom was sitting in her wheelchair. My daughter was visiting with her, and I was helping getting other residents out. And I was rolling one out and locking them in a wheelchair. I'd go and get another one. And they were having a good time. I'd look up every time, and there's probably 100 people on this patio. The grills are going, the music playing. It's a beautiful sunny day. And just as I'm locking in the last person, all of a sudden I hear my mom screaming at the top of her lungs at my daughter. Leave me alone. I hate you. I hate you. Leave me alone. Now, my daughter was about 17, 18 years old. She's only known her grandma with dementia. And she was mortified. And she comes running over. I'll get emotional. And this happened years ago. My daughter's like 35, but she comes running over and her lips quivering, and she's just got tears streaming down her face. And she goes, Grandma hates me. She hates me. I didn't do anything wrong. And I just gave her this big hug. And I said, your grandma does not hate you, honey. I said, explain what happened. And she said, we were just sitting there. We were having a good time. And we were laughing and talking. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, she was eating a cookie and a chunk fell on her chest. I just picked up the cookie. And I said, honey, we have to break down what happened. Mom, I just told you. And I said, no, we have to break down the details of what happened and why it happened. I said, because grandma loves you, I said, so don't ever think that she doesn't. So I said, okay, you were talking and laughing. What else were you doing? Mom, I don't know where you're going with this. We were just sitting around talking and laughing. I said, well, were you holding grandma's hand? Well, yeah, I was holding her hand. I always hold her hand. I said, so you're talking and laughing. You're holding grandma's hand. What else were you doing? Mom, I just don't know where you're going with this. I said, did you have eye contact with grandma? Well, of course I did. I said, so you're talking and laughing, you're holding grandma's hand, and you have eye contact. What made you pick up the cookie? And she just like, Mom, I don't know. And I said, honey, did the conversation stop or change? And she goes, well, yeah, actually there was kind of a pause in the conversation. And I said, okay, so you weren't talking and laughing anymore. When you picked up the cookie, were you still holding grandma's hand? Well, no, I was sitting next to her, and she's in that big Jerry wheelchair. And no, I had to stand up. So I let go of her hand. So you're not talking and laughing. You're not holding her hand. Did you still have eye contact? Well, no, Mom, I had to look at the cookie on her chest. So I wasn't looking at her eyes. I said, honey, you lost 3 powerful connections. And in that nanosecond, when you reached in to pick up the cookie on her chest, you were a stranger. And her reaction was perfectly logical. It was a stranger danger situation. Why are you touching me there? And so she yelled out. You know, her perception of what was going on, the way her brain processed that was actually quite logical for kind of that bump in the road connection. And you know, we have to be much more conscious and in looking at why there are these reactions instead of just labeling them, oh, it's the dementia, you know, it's the this, it's the that. No, that's not enough. Don't call it a behavior. That's not a positive thing. It's a reaction or a clue to tell us something isn't functioning the way it used to. So what can we do to help support that? And I just think there's so many of those circumstances that we don't address like that because we've been taught to just label it, blame it on the dementia. And that's the way it is, you know. And there's just so much that's different. In wrapping up, I'm going to bring up one other point, and this was one that Harry Urban made years ago, and that was with sight. And maybe I'll give two that can change the way you are able to process things. One was, I'll say, Norms McNamara's first, when he talked about walking into a shop with dark green carpet with there were like gold weeds, you know, lined up. It was kind of like a Jack and the Beanstalk type thing. But his perception was that those weeds were snakes and they were standing up and coming after him. And, you know, and it was a whole depth perception change. And again, a lot of that can change with aging, but it can be complicated with dementia. But Harry Urban talks, and I got to remember the point I was gonna make with Harry, because he gives us so dang many nuggets, and now I forgot the one I was gonna say. It was the one with Harry where he was starting to feel real paranoid, and he was working at his desk and he kept thinking somebody was behind him, and he kept looking and there was never anybody there. And then Hazel, his wife, came in and he said, you know, someone's there. And she's like, no, nobody's here. Well, she ended up figuring out that what was happening was it was a sunny day, but there were some clouds. And when the clouds came, they had the blinds open and the room would darken. And he couldn't piece that together anymore. So Hazel shut the blinds and then, you know, it disappeared. So it's getting creative and looking at not only the person, but the environment in terms of what is going on, because so many things can be adapted to, like the great adaptions you guys have talked to today. But we have to be open to recognizing them and taking that challenge on, you know, and using that quote that this is a challenge, you know, but I am able to manage this.
And not but this is a challenge and not but.
Okay.
That's just me. That's just the way I see it. This is a challenge and I have the resources. My amygdala goes down, and then I work on the resources. You know, that instant freak out settles down just with, for me, this is just my, you know, it's just that one thing, and then I move on.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction. It's kind of like the improv is the and for opportunities and possibilities and things with that.
And I think having the word resources in that phrase is so important, because that's what triggers our brain to, okay, what are those resources?
Solution.
What are the options?
Instead of just giving into it. Yep.
Yeah, otherwise it's a nice phrase. It makes me feel better, but it doesn't do anything.
Well, again, a wonderful, insightful conversation. I appreciate you ladies so much for sharing. To our listeners, I hope that you learned as much as I did from them. And again, I really encourage people to like, click, and share this, don't keep these nuggets secret. The more we can spread the word and, change the stigma of, people with dementia can't contribute and can't troubleshoot their own disease, can't be involved, will be a huge, huge step. And the other thing that we're doing here is identifying issues that might help you identify issues. If it's with a loved one, a coworker, a stranger, it doesn't make any difference, but just looking at the world a little more broadly, being a little more accepting and hopefully helpful. So thanks, everyone. Oh, go ahead.
One more thing.
Thank
Sorry.
you, Lori. Thank you.
Another spray. Take what you like, take what I like, and leave the rest. And that goes anytime I'm in a group. And I mean, when you've met one person with dementia, you've only met one person with dementia. Yep. So that might apply, that might not. That doesn't mean it's bad or good, but take what I like, leave the rest. So Thank you, Lori, for the platform. Appreciate it. So
well, thank you. And again, I that saying, when you've met one person, you've met one person. I believe in take as much as you can, because even what doesn't apply today might apply tomorrow. What might work, today might not work tomorrow, but it might work, a week from now. So don't. That's kind of the way this disease works. It's fluid. And, we have to keep that in mind as well. So thank you all so much. We will catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.